Right, and that's a very valid point you're making, and I think it's one that's raised by the weaknesses of the way in which I wove that paragraph into the article, and I could see why it kind of rattled people because. If I'm advancing humanitarianism, the question is, well, what if you have a small community where people just, quite frankly, don't give a flying leap for a humanitarianism, right? What does the humanitarian do in that case? Do we invade? Do we? And of course, the answer to that is absolutely not. What you want is maximum diversity and decentralization, and that means, of course. Small enclaves of what might be a completely authoritarian style order, exactly as the type that I constructed there. I get what my point was, that is to say that that's not what we should aspire to, and that the ethos that's alive in a community like that is not the liberal ethos, and that if you have a fully free society, there'll be a trajectory towards kind of universalizing a commercial spirit, and one that's ever more liberal. But for me to have implied that somehow, humanitarianism would be against the rights of that community to exist was really wrong. I mean, really wrong.
Right. I knew there was something more to it, but I read it and I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And maybe you should write a part 2.
Well, I think that I could have fixed that problem with just a little bit more of integration with the paragraph before and the paragraph after, or maybe drop that paragraph and come up with a better example or something like that. What I was trying to do was to illustrate that the liberal aspiration is something that really does seek and desire a kind of a flourishing society and as a universal norm. And I think actually we've seen this. I mean, a good example of this is like with free trade. Like the more globalized the economy is, the more Western styles and Western ideas are pervading the whole of the world, and I don't think that that's something entirely to regret. I think that's probably a good thing, Yeah. And the brutalists might look at that and say, "Oh, this is bad. We need these sort of walled utopias of authoritarian rule, and insofar as they're not invading their neighbors, then that's nothing to regret." And I guess my view is that if you have any abuse of power at any level of society in any way, like a real abuse of power, that is always something that the liberal spirit should regret in some way. Which is not to say that therefore there should be a coercive apparatus used against it, but it's something we should always regret. Now, let me clarify here, though, too. And that was the other slightly regrettable thing about the image I drew there. I did not mean to cast any kind of aspersions or even doubt on people who voluntarily enter as adults into communities of interest that are structured in a hierarchical way, and by which I would refer to things like monasteries or convents or these kinds of communities, because these are really purely voluntary orders. I mean, they're not structured like commercial societies. They're very different from the mall that you have in the downtown district of your city. But they express a different kind of value system. And yeah, I mean, to the extent that paragraph depreciated, that sort of institution, I very much regret it.
Yeah, I mean, it really took a great article overall and just kind of I wouldn't say made it worse or made it bad, just kind of made it
a little confusing. Yeah, because it was a great I was very pleased with the article, and I regret putting that in. And it's funny because Yeah, I guess as I approach the end, as a writer, you kind of go through this. You're like, okay, I've laid out a really pretty theory, but I bet the reader is kind of looking for a really concrete application that you can really sink your teeth into. And that was the one that sort of I generated in my mind, and yet it ended up being the one that confused people the most.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm glad we were able to clear that up, and hopefully people that were detracting the article can.
Well, it's funny because
make sense out of it too.
I had people write me and say, "Oh, that means you're against convents." Well, what's funny about it is that I spent over the last 10 years, I've traveled around to monasteries and convents myself, teaching Gregorian chant. Because that's a weird aspect of my life that I happen to be something of a specialist in this topic, to monks and nuns in these communities, and I've been unfailingly happy or impressed by the joy and the happiness and the piety and the beauty of those kind of self-contained communities. I think they're very beautiful. I must say too that I've been very impressed by the in the old-fashioned sense of the term, their liberality. They tend to be very beautiful and exciting, wonderful, happy places to live. And probably And it's funny, as a writer, you kind of go through this. As I reread that paragraph, I thought, what if I read that from the point of view of somebody who was very attached to a local, religious sect and something like that? I mean, would I be offended? And I guess when I wrote it, I hadn't really thought of it from that point of view entirely. And if I had, I would have clarified it and come up with probably a better explanation.
Yeah.
That's the thing about a writer. It's funny. People always treat your stuff as I don't know, like some sort of codified
right.
thing.
Like this is canon law for the libertarians.
Yeah, I know, right? And it's too high a standard for any writer. I mean, like in my case, it's funny. This is one of the reasons people have a difficult time writing, and one of the reasons I love running Liberty.me is that I'm trying to inspire people to write more. But people get scared to write because their thoughts are not complete,
Right.
And I decided very early on in my life, I thought, I'm going to chronicle the development of my ideas in real time, even if that means risks to me, even if I change my mind. And I've never been afraid to change my mind, and to learn and to put those new thoughts out there. In fact, I like doing that. To me, intellectual life is about the journey, not so much the conclusion. That it's the adventure of discovery that makes ideas and writing truly wonderful. And readers need to read that way. They should read an author as a person in the process of discovering new thoughts and having new insights, and hoping that writer will help you similarly gain new insights. I think this is the right way. You should go on a journey with the readers. And that Brutalism article, like, the thing that pleased me most about it is that it really did kind of cause a lot of people to think really hard about these issues. And I mean, even if they didn't agree with me entirely, and even if I didn't entirely agree with me, then that's okay, because we need that kind of those sort of ideas out there so that we think harder and think more broadly and think more thoroughly. And the more we're thinking about this topic of human liberty, the more we're helping to build it, I believe.
I totally agree. I have one last question, and I'm not really sure how I should word this question, but would you consider yourself to be a constitutionalist?
That was one of the questions on the quiz, like, which libertarian are you? And I can't really say that I am. Really, I don't think the Constitution was a good idea. It created a government out of a world where there wasn't a government. It was supposed to be self-limiting, but it didn't really work.
Because there's a lot of talk lately, I don't know if you've heard any of it, but a lot of people are talking about the solution is to hold an Article 5 constitutional convention. And
I know.
all others would just say, just leave it as it is and, strictly adhere to it, and that would be the solution.
Well, that's the problem. I mean, the great problem with constitutions is that ultimately it's a piece of parchment, and the party responsible to adhering to it is the same one you're trying to limit. Right. So it's a kind of fallacy. I think the framers were not all badly intended in that sense, but the classical liberals of the time were desperately trying to figure out how to limit government. And they thought that one way would be to get rid of the monarchy, and replace it with a kind of elected republic or democracy. They hadn't had any experience to know that actually that carries with its own dangers, and I think we've learned since that time. I'm always fascinated to go back and read Alexis de Tocqueville's account of American democracy, written in 1830s and 1840s. Because he just nails it. He gets the exact process by which a democracy becomes a despotism, and he forecasts so much. It's a beautiful book.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, we're actually out of time. I want to thank you for coming on the show. It was really fun talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Sometime.
Yeah, I enjoyed the chance to stretch out and just lay out my thoughts. So thank you so much.
All right, thanks for coming on, Jeff.
All right, bye-bye.
All right, so that was Jeffrey Tucker here on Liberty Unfiltered. We're coming to the end here, so come back next week, 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, here on Vigilant Liberty Radio. And don't forget that we are also being streamed over on K98 Talk and the Spark Radio Network. Next week, our conversation is whether or not religion and liberty are compatible. And I'll have a few friends joining me for that discussion. So that's it for me. Thanks for tuning in, folks.
Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the
This show is copyright by VLR Media. All opinions of hosts, panelists, and guests are their own and may not reflect the opinion of VLR Media or anyone else.